Our gospel today is very interesting. We hear of a dishonest steward, dishonest wealth, and then it seems Jesus is recommending dishonesty and making friends with what's dishonest. What is all this dishonest business? Kind of confusing a little bit, right? What's going on? Well, it seems a close reading of this text will actually reveal some very good insights and some lessons that are applicable to us, because this gospel is really addressed to us. In the gospel today, of course, we hear Jesus said to his disciples, so perk up. This is being addressed to disciples, and you and I are disciples, so this directly applies to us. We know, of course, at other times Jesus is addressing the scribes and the Pharisees, or is addressing the crowd in general, but this is specific to disciples, as opposed to last week when he was addressing the scribes and the Pharisees. So this is for us. And so Jesus addresses this parable to the disciples. And he tells us this story of a rich man who had a steward, somebody who takes care of another person's property. And this steward was reported to this rich man for squandering his property. The word that is used there to say squandering his property is the Greek verb diascorpizo. It literally means to scatter, to disperse, to waste. And it's the exact same Greek verb that is used in last week's parable, which we heard last week at Sunday, which is the parable of the prodigal son, to describe how that young man dispersed or squandered his inheritance. Same verb. And in that case, that disciple or that prodigal son squandered his inheritance. And in this case, we have a steward who's squandering what belongs to somebody else. And what happens? The rich man summons this steward to himself, and he basically interrogates him and tells him, "What is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward." Basically, he's being fired, and he's being given his notice that his job is over. He's no longer going to be a steward. And at that point, the steward basically begins to deliberate within himself. What shall I do? What shall I do now that my master is taking the position of stewardship away from me? And then even though he's dishonest, he's actually honest with himself about these two things. He says, I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. At least he knows himself well enough to know that I can't dig, I'm not up to manual labor. I've lived this life of being a steward, comfortable and all that, and I'm not going to go out and beg. I'm too ashamed. And so he basically resolves, I know what I shall do when I am removed from my stewardship, that they may welcome me into their homes. So he contrives a plan, albeit in a dishonest way, but a plan that will allow him to be welcomed into the homes of other people so that he doesn't have to beg or dig, so that they will accept him. So he makes friends with people who maybe not necessarily would have been his friends. And so he basically calls the debtors of his master, and then he asks one of them, how much do you owe my master? 100 measures of oil. Then he says, here, quickly, sit down, write one for 50. And then to another he says, how much do you owe my master? 100 cores of wheat. Okay, quickly, write a promissory note, write 80, right? So he's basically cheating his master. Now there are some people who will say, well, this man, the commentators will say, well, this man was basically giving them his own profits, and so he wasn't really cheating. Nah, there's no evidence in the text. He was cheating, clearly. No evidence. I don't see it. And the fact that these are random numbers, he goes from 50 to 80, it seems to me quite clear that he's just coming off the cuff. He's already told us he's doing this simply because he wants to gain friends. He's cheating. He's dishonest. But what is surprising is that it says, the master commended that dishonest steward. And why did he commend him? He didn't commend him for cheating, but he commended him for acting prudently, for being prudent. That's why he was commended. And why was he prudent? All along, when he was basically living his life of being a steward, he acted as if he was going to be a steward forever. So he squandered and wasted the master's stewardship. He acted as if he wasn't a steward. He thought, this is all mine, I can do whatever I want with it, as if it's his own property. To the point where people were probably scandalized, as we hear in the text, and they reported to the master, this guy is crazy. He's squandering all your wealth. And the master finally calls him in and he tells him, prepare a full account of your stewardship. You are no longer going to be my steward. when he finds out that he's no longer going to be steward, this is the first time he actually wises up and says, oh my goodness, I guess I'm not going to be a steward forever. What am I going to do now that I'm losing the stewardship? And then he actually deliberates and finally begins to wise up and make a plan for himself for a time when he's not going to be a steward anymore. And so what does he do? He decides to use, in an albeit dishonest way, he decides to use the very stewardship that was meant to cultivate for his master in a positive way. He begins to use that stewardship in such a way that it benefits him when he loses his stewardship. And that's why he's basically commended by his master, because he acts prudently. St. Augustine basically tells us, Jesus is commending to the disciples this steward. Why? For his foresight, his prudence, and ingenuity. Even though he does it in a dishonest way, he at least has foresight, prudence, and ingenuity in recognizing I'm not going to be a steward forever. I might as well do something now that benefits me when I lose my stewardship. And Jesus, the point of this parable is to say, if this guy who's already messed up and dishonest is doing this for material stuff, for stuff that pertains to a job and occupation, what more us? What more us disciples who are also stewards, except we are stewards of bigger things than just the property of a rich master. The rich man who we're stewards of is God. And God has given us stewardship of certain things in this world, right? He has given us the gift of time. He has given us our talents. He has given us treasures. If you think about it, let's think of time. Time is a gift that comes from God. We don't own time. It doesn't belong to us. Did any of us choose to be born? Did any of us choose to be born in this time? We could have been born 100 years later, or 100 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. But we are here now. It's a gift. It's not something we choose. We don't know how long we're going to be around. Some of us are given lots of time. Some of us, not so much time. Some of us are given this amount of time. Some of us are given that amount of time. It's not ours. It's a gift that comes from God. And therefore, God says, what are you doing with that time that I'm giving you? You're a steward. Take care of it. Use it for the purposes of glorifying my name. Use it for the purposes of cultivating it in the way that I designed it to be cultivated. Use it in such a way that is prudent so that it bears for you treasure in heaven. Don't squander it. Don't misuse it. It's a gift from me. Just like your talents. Remember the parable of the talents? How the Lord gives some people more talents and other people less talents. It's random. It's the Lord's own prerogative. But when he gives you a talent, what are you doing with it? Are you burying it in the sand like that crazy guy who buried his one talent in the sand, and then later on the Lord comes and the master comes and says, what did you do to it? Oh, I knew you were a hard man and I buried it. No, cultivate it. Make use of it. Cultivate it and then let it bless other people, whatever talent you have. If you're doing that, then you're being prudent. Your treasures, even your treasures, the material wealth that you have is a gift from God. There's a part that God plays, then there's a part that you play. And some people say, oh, but money, that's different, Father. You know, I really worked hard for my wealth. And I say, well, did you choose to be born in this country? There's some people who are born in other parts of the world and in other times who, no matter how hard they work, they can work as hard as you. They can even be more intelligent than you, but they will never even achieve half the material wealth that you have. So there's a part that you don't control. There's a part where you have just found yourself in this circumstance, and yes, you have done well in cultivating, but even that is ultimately a gift from God. So time, talent, and treasure. Make use of those things for the purposes of the kingdom. Be prudent. Invest it. Yes, take care of yourself. Take care of your family. That's part of God's plan. He likes that. But at the same time, if you've been blessed in a certain way, bless others. Give as a gift what you yourself has received as a gift. It ultimately doesn't belong to you. You're merely a steward. And the sooner you recognize that fact that you're a steward who's being given these manifest gifts for the purposes of cultivating, blessing, using, then the better off you are. And in the parable, this steward only wises up to the fact that, oh, I'm not going to be a steward forever, when he realizes that he's going to lose it. And so the same holds true for us as Christians. To always keep in sight the fact that one day we are going to die. We're going to die. That is why at Lent we dedicate that entire season to this prospect that we're going to die. On Ash Wednesday, this is the most attended day in the whole church calendar, that's not a holy day of obligation. Everybody wants their ashes. But what are we saying when we come to Ash Wednesday? You are dust, and to dust you shall return. Remember that, Christian. You don't live forever. Time is a gift. Your treasures are a gift. Your talents are a gift. Use them well. Keep in mind that one day you're going to be asked to account. What did you do with all this time? What did you do with all these treasures? What did you do with all these talents? And you want to be in a place where you can say, Lord, this is what I did with them. And if you have death in sight, then very often we wise up and we actually begin to use these things well instead of squandering them and throwing them away like this dishonest servant. And so that's the invitation of our gospel today. Be prudent. Be prudent. Remember, we're not going to live forever. Because the problem is when we deceive ourselves into thinking this is all there is, we begin not even see these things as gifts. We think, it's mine. It's mine. Remember Spiegel in Lord of the Rings? It's my precious, my precious. Like, totally, like, his whole life is obsessed by possessing to the point that he loses everything. He loses everything. And that's what happens if we lose sight of the bigger picture and we begin to think this is all there is. Oh, I have this talent. It's mine, my precious. And you grab onto it. And we begin to be selfish. We begin to squander it. We begin to act as if there's nothing else. And then when we lose it completely, totally lose it. And everybody loses because of that. On the other hand, if we're investing in the kingdom of heaven, if we're remembering the fact that, hey, I am dust, and what I have here is precious, I want to make maximum use of it, then what happens? I actually become a blessing to others. And I think we all know this, even at a natural human level. Many times you run into people who are diagnosed with terminal illnesses and things like that, or usually people who have come close to dying. Very often those people will tell you straight up, I live every day as a gift. Every day is a blessing. Hold your loved ones tight. Love people tightly. Don't waste time on frivolous things, resentment, hatred, hating. It's not worth it at the end of the day. Invest yourselves in the things that are enduring. Love, taking care of your family, being there for your loved ones. Those are the things that really matter at the end of the day. And people naturally see this, especially when they are confronted with the reality of death. And that's why it's always salutary, as the church encourages us to do, to reflect on our own death every once in a while. We're not afraid of that, precisely because we have hope, right? So reflect on that and see how you view your own, time, talents, and treasures in the bigger picture. And that'll usually help us to be able to become better stewards. And here's the nice thing. When we actually become good stewards of God's things, it's a net gain on all fronts. Because not only do we use our time and our talents and our treasures better because we are seeing them as gifts from God and we're making use of them, to bless others, to bless ourselves, to bless our families. And we not only make this world a better place, but we're actually gaining treasure in heaven. It's a net gain on both fronts. We don't lose. It's a gain, win-win. We make the world a better place when we live our today in light of the hope that is come tomorrow. If we live our world today, our lives today, in light of our heavenly inheritance. That is why in the gospel today, Jesus says, if you are trustworthy with what belongs to another, if you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, time, talent, and treasure, who is going to give you what's yours? And what is yours? You've been given the kingdom of heaven as an inheritance by grace. That's what we've been given. And that's the thing that we're going to possess forever, guaranteed if we persevere. Time, talent, treasure, that's fickle. It's here or there. It'll disappear. It's going to go. But the kingdom of heaven, that's permanent. And so take care of what you've been given now. Live it as a gift in thanksgiving and praise. Cultivate it and invest it in the kingdom of heaven. Use it prudently. Sure, take care of your family, take care of yourself, but be prudent. Remember, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And one day you will make an account of how you used your time, talent, and treasure. So make use of it for the kingdom of heaven. And when we do that, we will not only gain treasure in heaven, but even in this world, you will create and make a better world because you're living for the kingdom of heaven. Praise be Jesus Christ.